This is Austin Faith Dialogue, a public affairs program discussing the important crossroad of religion in life, produced by Austin Metropolitan Ministries in cooperation with KTBC TV. Austin Faith Dialogue highlights the interaction of the religious community with the social and cultural issues throughout our area. Now, today's edition of Austin Faith Dialogue.
Hello, welcome to Austin Faith Dialogue. I'm your host, Richard Thompson of Central Presbyterian Church. Has the search for God among men come full circle? When Robert Bly wrote Iron John, he explored the way males are conditioned to be closed and in some ways inauthentic. The search for a spiritual life is not a fad. Scott Peck, a well-known psychiatrist, has been exploring issues of spirituality for years. Now, men from Austin's own Keith Miller, with Sin Overcoming the Ultimate Deadly Addiction, to Patrick M. Arnold's Wild Men, Warriors, and Kings, Masculine Spirituality in the Bible, men are searching for a deeper meaning of life. Here to explore the ways in which men are connecting with the divine in traditional and non-traditional ways are Bill Bruzy, director of the Austin Men's Center, and Alan Maurer of Hill Country's Men's Center. And we thank you both for joining us today. And I'd like to just, first of all, recognize the relationship between men's spirituality and the men's movement, as it maybe is more generally known. And if you could, maybe Bill, give us a little bit of a sense of the men's movement as the context for that.
Well, the men's movement really is composed of a lot of different interests that men have had. So there's some aspects of the men's movement that are very political and concerned with men's rights in child custody cases. The side of the men's movement that Alan and myself are interested in is a more spiritually oriented aspect of men's work. There's been a burst of interest in men in the last few years in terms of finding their own spirits, in terms of finding healthy emotions, in terms of finding relationships with their fathers, with their children, with other men, and ultimately a spiritual relationship to the wider universe.
Okay. So even though the men's movement has this broader significance, I can remember custody issues as representing that, and men being in touch with their own feelings, the psychological side of that. Are you also relating to the spiritual dimension particularly, Alan?
Very much so, in that men come in for a variety of psychological issues, relationships with their wives, their partners, their children. But what it often comes down to is the relationship with spirit. They often say that I've done everything society said I should do to be successful, and most of them have been very successful. But there still is a hole in their soul, and they often describe it that way, an deep emptiness, a longing for connection with spirit. And they're real hungry to find some new ways to connect.
Don't men have a harder time with faith matters or feeling matters? I mean, it seems to be all connected as far as generally called being in touch with your feelings. And because faith practice and spirituality is so much coming out of the emotional side, is that what we're seeing? Is the stereotypes about men have had that effect?
Well, I think there's some truth to that. We've looked a lot at oppression of women over the last 20 years, and women have been oppressed. And the oppression of women has been largely external in terms of power in the world. Men have also been oppressed. We've lived in oppressive systems for generations, for thousands of years actually. Male oppression has been internal. Men have been cut off from their own inner lives, whereas women have been cut off from more effectiveness in an external life. So men have really had to function kind of from the neck up.
We grow up without the right to express our feelings in this country as young boys. You can't say how you feel beyond a few very basic words, or you're ridiculed. You know, you're called a sissy. So we stuff all our feelings. And what we're seeing across the country from men, where the women's movement was came up with a lot of anger and rage, men are grieving. What's coming up for them is a lot of sadness. What society disallows, we repress, and for men it's been the right to express our feelings and to grieve. What's coming out of that grieving is they go down and grieve the losses in their lives, often the loss of their children, the fact they weren't there for them growing up, the loss of connection they had with their own fathers. Ultimately what comes up is a new spiritual awareness because through the grief and through the anger comes a whole new sense of connection with their feelings. And when they feel, men are more spiritual, and we're basically spiritual animals.
Mm-hmm. Well, I have a sense that as we deal with some of the issues that will continue to be part of our conversation today, we'll get at some lower levels of where that grief leads us. I'd like to know, first of all, just in terms of who you fellows are, your background, and what brought you to this men's movement and spirituality work.
Well, I'm trained in public health, and I was trained in the mid-'70s to run alcoholism programs. So I worked a lot in the mental health field, and looked for cultural solutions to problems. That's been my perspective. It's like, how do we design programs? How do we design parts of society? How do we design government programs to meet the needs and heal the wounds of populations? After that, at some point, I went through a lot of the transformation that we see in men, in which I was very, very unhappy in what I was doing, and reached kind of a personal crisis point myself.
I see.
In which some of the kinds of health problems that men run into, I had, and at some point it seemed like I wasn't going to make it. And at that point I gave up. I really let go, and what happened is a whole new side of my being started to come to light. I started learning about dance, I started learning about art, I started playing music and drumming, and opening up this whole other side of my being. As I did that, I got healthier. That these life-threatening health problems just simply went away, and I was kind of stunned by that.
Okay, so not only professionally, where you began to learn the limitations of just trying to do it sort of the way the world does it, but personally, when you got met a dead end, that you found a way to give expression to who you are now.
Yeah. And a lot of that came through kind of opening to the feminine in myself.
Okay.
And that's the story of a lot of men in the 70s and 80s, is that through the influence of feminism and through moving into that side of themselves, we did open to the feminine in ourselves. At the same time, there's again a limit to that kind of exploration, in that, you know, men who become feminized in that way tend to be pervasively ineffective in the world, and there's a deep masculine that also needs to be brought to life.
What brought you to this work?
A couple of things. Similar to Bill, I originally was trained in business and had my own company, and pushed myself as far as I could go as a small businessman, and put myself in some health problems. More importantly, my disconnection with my own son. I found myself treating my son the way my father had treated me, even though as growing up I'd swore I'd never do that. And I went back to school, retrained, and found that in traditional therapy we treated men like we did women, and that wasn't effective. You can't do therapy for men the same way, because with women they're already more in touch with feelings than men are. And so we started developing a model of working with men that helped them get in touch with their feelings and validate themselves in their inner experience that our culture doesn't validate, and to help them explore themselves.
So it was the incidents with your own child that precipitated it?
Yes, it was a very large part of it.
Okay. Plus the fact that when you're in the world of business, I mean, you got to act tough, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a brutal world out there.
And what I'm finding with men who come in, that they're all suffering in silence, that most of them are not happy with the business model we're using now, that this very competitive, we're competing with other men for everything, and that doesn't work, but there's no chance to talk about it.
It was right after Father's Day, and Jay Leno had a sketch in which he said, you know, there's something about Father's Day that just doesn't quite work the way it does with Mother's Day. I called my dad, and I was on one coast and he was on the other, and said, "Hi, Dad, it's Jay." And my father said, "What's wrong?" And he said, "Well, I just wanted to wish you a happy Father's Day." "You want me to come out there?" No, things are fine. Just want to let you know that I love you, Dad." "Oh, well, here's your mother." And it was almost a classical expression of how the difficulty of, you know, just expressing your love for each other. And I suspect you find a lot of that in your counseling and your group work.
We certainly do, and for men, the disconnection from fathers and that generational history, man to man, has just been missing for us. It's been part of the modern era where men have not stood next to their fathers in the workplace or learned from their fathers. We live in a culture of the absent father, and it's caused tremendous psychological problems for men and women, and I think impacted on us spiritually in that we haven't learned, you know, from one person, from one generation to the next, and that the traditions that would help people gain spiritual experience are just lost to a lot of men, and just that deep felt love for your father, which opens your spirit, has been missing.
A very special relationship that's meant to be there.
Yeah.
Well, there's several studies that show a strong correlation between the relationship we have with our parents and our relation to God or Spirit. And if the parental relationship is not good, we have a much harder time connecting with God.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to just in a moment have you tell me a little bit about before the show you were mentioning a doctor who's done some work on prayer. Sort of the way you can give some credence to the prayer life that were you the one that was mentioning that to me, Alan? Could you share that?
Yeah, Dr. Larry Dorsey wrote a book called Recovering the Soul.
Larry Dorsey.
Larry Dorsey.
Okay.
And in the book he cites a lot of research that's been done on prayer. And what we find with men is they want concrete information. We don't want to take it all on faith. We want some research to back it up.
Empirical validation
Exactly.
sort of thing, yeah.
And there have been a surprising number of double-blind studies done validating the impact of prayer on healing, on changing. Even germination of plants is impacted by prayer. And that in my men's group, that's one of the issues. We pray as a group every evening at 10 o'clock for men who bring things in that they want to work on. So in addition to the psychological, we're working on the spiritual.
I see. What about your experience along that line of prayer?
Prayer and meditation are a regular part of the work that we do. Some men, because they may have been injured by their spiritual upbringing, hold that traditional approach to prayer at a distance. They want to disassociate themselves from it. But we have one group that's strictly a group of silence, where men gather in silence and just sit silently.
I mean, this is
meditate.
non-sectarian prayer that you're
Yes.
both talking
No,
about,
not
I'm
at
sure.
all.
Yeah.
And the silence is a way of, if people are not comfortable in a religious tradition, at least they can use that to meditate.
Yeah.
Right, exactly.
One of the things we work quite a bit with is men who were, as Bill said, have a lot of negative reaction to their spiritual upbringing. And it's giving them a new form of, a new connection with spirit because they have often such a strong negative reaction that has to be overcome. We see this a lot in the 12-step movement also.
Yeah, people have sort of been burned by their religious upbringing or their past. Yeah,
Or at least somebody's interpretation of it.
right. Well, another thing too that along the lines of the 12-step movement, I've had occasion to visit with Keith Miller on the show, and his whole approach to recovery, and as it relates to the church, is that you're not in a church per se, but you are drawing from that same overall. I mean, it's the spiritual revolution of our time. It seems to me is how many people are getting touched by not just Alcoholics Anonymous, but by Debtors Anonymous and the variety of those groups. You don't necessarily identify what you're doing as a men's group, as a 12-step group, though.
No.
No, it's been a primary influence, though, in the formation of the Austin Men's Center, started by Alan and John Lee and some other people, that the recovery movement was kind of the foundation from which a lot of the interest collected to start men's work. And it started some in Alcoholics Anonymous, and that men wanted groups of strictly men. And so there was, a lot of that emerged. And so the model of spirituality being part of emotional recovery started there.
I see. Well, we'll be coming back to that. We're going to have to pause now for a short break, but stay tuned, and we'll look forward to rejoining our guests with the subject of men's spirituality.
Serving Austin means serving you. That has always been the primary goal of Austin Metropolitan Ministries. We are religion in action through the work of these organizations. Each plays a key role in making the capital city a better place to live. But we can't do it alone. Do you have some spare time, talents, or any resources that you can share? If you do, please call AMM at 472-7627 because serving Austin means serving you.
And I had the male model of being tough.
I never saw my dad cry.
I think once you become a man, you become a human being.
It's very difficult to be close to men if what you're supposed to do is beat them or make more money than them or take their woman away from them.
I think society says that men are supposed to be able to fix things, that we come up with the right answers all the time. As head of households, that's what we do. And when I don't do that, I feel inadequate and I feel like I'm failing as a man.
Welcome back. We're continuing our discussion today on the issues of men's spirituality with Bill Bruzy and Alan Moyer. I believe it's Maurer.
Right.
I just was recognizing you, though, Bill, in this little sketch. This was a Today Show program about the Austin's Men's Center.
Well, about the Wild Man gatherings, I believe it was, and Sunday Morning Today Show. There's been a tremendous amount of media interest in men's movement.
Mm-hmm. And this wild man side of it, though, that's what they pick up on.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
it's sensational, and you wonder why are all these guys running around beating drums, and you know, so it captures some attention. But there really is some wisdom behind all the acting out. The drumming part, for me, I've really enjoyed drumming over the years, and in those years when I was learning about arts, I spent a lot of time drumming in it. And in the men's movement, what drumming does is it can bring a room full of men together. You just can't escape the feeling of the rhythm. But at the same time, in order to drum, you can't sit around and think too much and drum. It's a thing that brings you down into your body where your feelings exist.
it's a right brain kind of thing.
Yeah, and so that's, and it's fun too.
Yeah.
It's men getting together having fun, and it beats sitting around in a bar playing pool and getting drunk.
Beating the drum beats the bars.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, what's your experience, Alan, as far as this wild man side of thing? Do you see that as a stereotype of what the men's movement is about?
No, it's one interesting part of it in that do workshops in the woods to get men out of their comfortable environment and to help get them out of their heads and in their bodies. Also to create a new model of masculinity where men can be off and be vulnerable with each other, be open with no women around, and just really real candid about what it feels like to be a man, what it felt like to grow up with a father who wasn't there or a father who was abusive. And it's a new model for how men can be non-competitive and be supportive of each other. And we're now doing these workshops for churches, we're doing them in prisons, and having a really warm response from men all over the country, even in federal prisons. When they're over, we find guys hugging who haven't touched in 20 years of imprisonment.
Well, I think that that is a question that comes up naturally as far as your relation to the religious community. Are churches showing themselves open to what you do, Bill?
Certainly, they've been more and more supportive over the years, and have been integrative of 12-step work and that particular philosophy, and been, you know, supportive in terms of lending space and lending a hand. And I feel, when we were talking earlier about men being maybe driven away from the church because of childhood abuse that they had maybe identified with the church, that I also see there's a reintegration occurring, that men who begin to heal and a lot of those childhood wounds are drawn back into more traditional forms.
And the church is an accepting place in which to do that. Well, I think that the other question, as you were talking just a minute ago, Alan, that came to mind, the men getting away apart from the women. it almost sounds like you're defining yourself as over against women.
No, not at all, and that's a good question. There's never anything negative about women said. It's actually a chance for men to focus on themselves for a change. When women are around, it's very easy for us to focus on them. Are we doing it right? And what we rarely have a chance to do is to get together with other men and validate what it's like to be a man.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's really a chance to focus on ourselves and go inward, as Bill was talking about, on the inner landscape. And more churches now are starting to do men's groups around the country.
One of the things, too, I'll just let you know from an outside perspective,
Sure.
it sounds like that the men's movement may be something that has some connection with the gay movement. What's your relationship to men who are homosexuals?
Well, I had that feeling, you know, when in the Austin Men's Center, I thought that when I first went over there, I thought there'd be a preponderance of gay males, but basically the population seems, you know, fairly balanced. And gay men find a lot of acceptance in the men's movement, that it's really less of an issue than one might think, and that for me it's been very helpful to address my fears, to address my resistance to gay men, and to find that we're just all men together and we all have very, very similar concerns. We want to learn about relationships and about ourselves. And that one of the things that happens at men's gatherings is that men confront their fear of each other. And we particularly put those towards gay men, but we also just fear men. Showing up at a gathering with 125 guys is intimidating. By the time you're through that weekend and find that you can be friends with gay men and straight men and, you know, cops and lawyers.
Yeah. It's almost like gender goes deeper than sexuality.
Oh, yeah.
And whether the person's sexual preference is gay or heterosexual
Exactly.
is less the issue than what does it mean to
To
be a man.
Right.
And I think, you know, the whole debate about the military, you know, gays in the military is a way of lifting up the fact that you can have tough gays and you can have men who are open to the feminine side without being homosexual.
Right.
I mean, it's breaking up more than one kind of stereotype.
Yeah. Yeah, these are universal forces that I see, and that go all the way down to the molecular level. I mean, there's something very fundamental about masculinity and femininity that's, is, as you said, much more than just our sexual preference.
We're also in the process of redefining masculinity and expanding it so that a man can be very loving and nurturing with his child and not have to be worried about seeing as being effeminate. Or he can connect and hug his father and not have to be worried about being seen as gay.
Arnold Schwarzenegger probably does a good job on that in The Kindergarten Cop, where he can really relate to little kids tenderly.
Yeah.
Obviously, he's a he-man and no threat to his self-identity. And I also like to, before our program closes, have people know, you know, how to get in touch with those of you who are helping men get in touch with their feelings. What's your location and where do you do your work?
Well, we're located up on Medical Parkway 4314, and you can simply look up the Austin Men's Center in the phone book and give us a call. Allen's Hill Country Men's Center is located just down the hall from us at the same address. And you can call us. There are more and more men's groups occurring, and calling recovery programs, Alcoholics Anonymous, asking about, you know, men's groups or other community services.
This is a nonprofit group, both of these?
We don't actually have nonprofit status. We're just a small business.
I see. Okay. And now the Women's Center here, I think, is a nonprofit.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
It looked too complicated for me to...
And they are, in some ways, more sophisticated. They've been at this business a lot longer than we have as men.
That's right.
Now, I've gone into the Women's Center and noticed how the variety of services that they offer. I mean, there's counseling for women who want to get back to the marketplace, women who are having problems with their kids or with abusive husbands. I mean, it's really a range of services. Would your services range anything like to that extent?
In some ways we do, in that we work with men in whatever their issue is. And so we do general psychotherapy counseling. So if it's divorce or divorce recovery or marriage counseling or family counseling, we cover those issues. Probably 20 years from now we'll have subcategories for each of those. But at this stage we work with men on whatever comes in.
And does Hill Country Men's Center mean that you're outside the Austin metropolitan area? And
No, actually we're right, as Bill said, right down the hall from him there at 4314 Medical Parkway.
You're not dividing this up geographically.
No.
Then? But you do reach out beyond just the Austin community.
Yes, now we do workshops around the country.
And would you like to add to what is done over in his side of the office? What kinds of services you offer?
Well, we tend to keep our focus pretty local, although we are known from Alan's work and John Lee's work and Marvin Allen's work around the country. I really wanted to keep a local focus for men in a friendly, kind of comfortable environment. We do not, when you talk about the Women's Center, we don't have as many problem-solving kinds of services. We tend to address problems and feelings and in terms of how men see themselves and relate to the world. But, you know, in terms of job help and that kind of stuff, we certainly don't provide as much of that, and we don't feel that there's as much of a call for it with men. The real problems are heartfelt problems.
I think it's more things like marriage counseling and how do I get along with my son are the issues we deal with.
Right. Right at the top of the show, made reference to Robert Bly, the book Iron John. I guess that made it well known to the public in terms of the literature that there was a men's movement. Just toward the end here, give us your reaction to Bly's work and how you've come away from that or how you depart from that.
Well, I think that he did a wonderful job, and particularly in a video gathering of men that was done here in Austin with Bill Moyers, of awakening something in the male spirit. That a lot of guys saw an article of his in New Age magazine and that videotape, and later the Iron John book, and it awakened something deep. His poetic nature really touched something archetypal in us, and for that we're forever grateful. And our work tends to be more practically oriented towards, you know, healing, emotional healing.
So you've taken what he started and continued to apply it in some new ways. Do you have a response?
He voiced men's sense of disconnection from other men, from their families, the isolation and emptiness men feel, especially from our fathers. And then we have then worked with how to reconnect men with their families. But he certainly voiced the pain that all men feel.
And what other author have you found particularly helpful in your work, Alan?
Herb Goldberg, Why Men Are the Way They Are, Hazards of Being Male, have been real impactful books for lots of men.
And I would like to continue our little bibliography here because I know there's a lot of literature that's come out on that, but I think this has given folks a quick view of it. I want to thank you, Bill Bruzy and Alan Maurer, for being with us today, and I'd like to thank you folks for looking in. I'm Richard Thompson, in behalf of Austin Metropolitan Ministries, thanking you for joining us, and be happy to have you come back next week. Until then, peace be with you.